Jay, welcome back. We had you here 2 years ago. You were running for the New Hampshire Senate, and now you're there and running for re-election. So, given 2 years of legislating, what surprised you the most about the Senate?
Surprised me the most? The number of bills, the volume of the work. This last year, it's the off year, not an appropriation year. It's supposed to be the lighter of the 2 years. And we had 1,100 bills. And of those 1,100, about 340 of them made it through both chambers. That's a huge volume of work. In the Senate, we sponsored about 350 of those. So we had you've got that workload. You've got the remainder coming over from the House, probably around an equal number, about 400 there. So, and my role is to do the best job I can for Cheshire County. And I feel that if I don't, there is not a second voice in the legislature. It's not Rockingham County, it's not Merrimack or Hillsborough County. There is one state senator whose district is entirely in Cheshire County, and that's District 10. And if I'm not present and able to speak to the bills that come on the floor, then there is a possibility that there are some things of importance to people in Cheshire County that will go unspoken for. And I try to take as many positions as I can on behalf of the voters of Cheshire County as I can. So I work, for a part-time avocational type position. I work as hard as I've ever worked. And it's not just in the Senate that you've got to be in place and in tune. You've got to be in place and in tune with your constituency. And because issues are emerging, people may or may not have thought about the specifics of a bill, and you've got to be in communications with your constituency in order to accurately represent them.
So what kind of means of communication have you been able to establish with constituency? How have you pulled that off?
Yeah, well, in addition to having a website, conforsenate.com, I also publish a newsletter that I distribute. It's intended to be monthly and more likely to be every 6 weeks. And people sign up for that all the time via the website. I have convened specific tables for conversation. For instance, as we were moving the broadband legislation through the legislature, I convened a Monadnock region interest group that was representing probably 20 towns and multiple people sometimes from each town, but 20 towns in the Monadnock region that had a stake, an interest in improved broadband communications in their community. That was very valuable. It helped shape the legislation. Clearly, the industry had perspectives on it that I was able to bring to their to the town table, and I was able to take the town's issues to an industry table and to promote that kind of interaction. I've convened a mental health interest group that has about 30 people attending, leaders from large organizations like Cheshire Medical and Monadnock Family Services and MAPS, to the Monadnock Peer Support Group and Serenity Center and the drug court, because we've got to grow the capacity for mental health in the region, and no single organization is going to do that. And so We don't meet often. It's not to add more burden, but it is to recognize on a quarterly basis that we come together and share what it is we can do collaboratively to move the needle. And hopefully in this next round of RFPs that are coming out to address the opioid substance use disorder epidemic that we have in this state, that we are more competitive for those grants. And because points are awarded, they're always adjudicated in a fair criteria, but you've got to drive your proposal to the criteria, and collaboration is one of those criteria. Fortunately, another criteria, and I think I've had something to do with this, is that rural western New Hampshire is also part of the criteria to try to address rural areas. And it's no longer just a myopic view that rural New Hampshire is defined by the North Country. Rural New Hampshire is also defined by what we experience here in western New Hampshire. And so that rural characteristic is part of an award criteria for some of these RFPs. So yes, convening tables so that we can move things forward. I have gone to 13 of the 15 towns that I represent select board meetings. And it's not because our interests necessarily overlap that much, though they do. We can talk about election postponements and bills like that, local control kinds of questions about waterways, dams. We can talk about emergency response. And also communication issues, not just broadband, but the mobility connection challenge that I've been enlisting towns to participate in. But it's also to honor the fact that they are elected officials and they are the voices for their communities. And I think we have a more integrated tiers of government when the state legislators are interacting on a regular basis with a familiarity beyond the name and a phone number, that we interact with each other freely and openly about issues. And it's promoted dialogue. I both am writing to them about legislation on which I want their opinions, and they're writing me on issues.
So you've talked with local officials and local residents over the last couple of years as their representative, and you have seen what's happening in Concord and learned your way around a little. What are your legislative priorities for this coming session? Are there bills you're proposing on particular topics that are important to you?
Yes. I think workforce is very important. It's the #1 issue in the state. And the workforce pipeline needs to be primed. And that's looking at education from early childhood education through college education to make sure that we are providing quality access, affordable access, and the kinds of services, the kind of preparation that our workforce needs. There is nothing that helps school proficiency more than early childhood education. Some people considered kindergarten to be playtime. It's not playtime. It's socialization, emotional stabilization in school. It's some preparatory learning, and it is a great equalizer. So that was an important step. We got to do more. We didn't fund full-day kindergarten. We're still there. We still will need to debate how much does full-day kindergarten get appropriated. It's still not being treated like every other grade level. And then maybe we can talk about early childhood education and the state's role in trying to equalize access to early childhood education. Because nothing will invest more in the education of a child than helping them in those early developmental years. Let's move beyond that, because once we get into the school years, we got to start talking about careers with students in the middle schools, because the curriculum starts to shape itself around where your career expectations, your horizons are getting set. And then we've got to have a delivery system in high school that's going to bridge students from that middle school introduction into a high school curriculum that also offers concurrent college credit that will give people a springboard and a career-ready credential when they graduate high school. Now, you may say career-ready is, I'm going to college. Well, great. We probably have more career-ready opportunities for college-bound students than anybody else. We've got AP tests, accelerated education in the high schools. You can take the test. We've got concurrent enrollment that can work. But where we need something that I will be introducing is that if we have the career preparation talk and discussion about how education relates to career opportunities in the middle schools, we then need to provide access to career and technical education in 9th grade. You can't make a break. You can't say, well, we'll put that off a year. I mean, you gotta make the connection and invest in that. The capacity, we need to test the capacity, but what I understand is that the capacity is within the system to be able to absorb 9th graders. And the point on this is the career-ready credential could be a math course that relates to a career. It could be in the construction trades or in the manufacturing field, in healthcare preparation, in business back office work. Those are the career-ready credentials that we would deliver. The math, the writing and communication courses around those kinds of career aspirations, and then the introduction through the career technical education courses to how perhaps a 4-course sequence delivers to that student a career-ready credential at the point of graduation from high school, with concurrent college credit being awarded for those courses, so that as the person scaffolds, takes that step into the workforce, but also takes that step into their post-secondary education credential, we have provided that ladder for students and into the workforce, so that the workforce itself can have some input into what the high school experience ought to yield. Because we're losing our students. That's the point, right? We're losing our students from our local communities by not building those bridges. We're certainly losing our college-bound students, and according to our workforce, which is shrinking locally, we don't have enough people coming into the pipeline to replace those who are leaving it. So we've got to make every opportunity through our educational systems.
So,
Is it important for employers to be involved other than just providing input into what they're being taught?
Oh, yes.
What's the state role in getting that involvement?
In some way, I mean, these need to be local initiatives. Where state government needs to be involved is in the visionary piece. And now, let me I don't think I approached that in entirely the right way. Where's the state role? Higher education policy is clearly one of those areas. I introduced an amendment this last year to freeze college tuition. It was defeated on a straight party vote. I introduced legislation on graduate retention incentive partnerships. Wouldn't have cost the state but $15,000 a year to maintain it through a database maintained in the Bureau of Economic Affairs. The point is some incentive that would pay down college debt for graduates of any college in the state. We're an importer of college students. Besides being an exporter of our high school students, we're an importer of college students. Let's retain them. Let's find a mechanism. Industry was ready to pay for it. The Business and Industry Association supported it. The New Hampshire College University Council supported it. And 4 votes in the Senate supported it, but 1 vote didn't. And so it got tabled. We'll see if that comes back, because those type of loan repayment programs are great, and employers ought to receive some credit for investing in those, and that was essentially the state's role in promoting those businesses that provide that kind of incentive, and promoting that then to all colleges and to all college students, graduates, those particular firms or government agencies, even schools provide step incentives. It's a packaging issue. Other ways that the state can play a role. Career education, the access to it is not equal. You know, if you've got a career education program connected to your high school, that's a great opportunity. But if you live in Fall Mountain, or you live in the Monadnock district, you've got to travel. And those reimbursement rates need to be figured out. Or if we're going to make 9th grade career education accessible, how are you going to get students from point A to B? So we've got to think about that delivery mechanism. State policy can also be more active in the mental health space to try to improve our workforce opportunities, and because we're losing people in that respect as well. And so it's not just through school policy. It can also be through our mental health delivery system that helps keep people balanced when they reach those imbalanced points in their lives. And we do not have enough community-based services and support.
So do I understand you then to say that the legislation you are crafting or imagining relative to reaching students at a younger age, is that what you're specifically seeking, or is it broader than that?
I'll be seeking on the vocational technical education access. I'll be working with others about loan repayment and better support for higher education so that we can keep the cost of higher education down. I'll be working on kindergarten funding, full-day kindergarten funding, and get that off of our agenda so that we can start having the conversations about early childhood education in the state. And I think, I will be looking at special education funding too, because I think that, one, we aren't fully meeting the state's commitment. The costs over 3.5 times the average cost of daily attendance. And that throws an unfair burden on the school districts, and it's also creating a great chasm in our local schools where people no longer want to pay for special education that students need. And it's not like the needs for special education are diminishing. So we've got to stabilize how we're funding special education in the state. I'm working with a group of people across the state to determine our best approach on that issue.
To go back a step, when you were talking about the career-ready credential at the high school level, and you talked about the career center type of vocational training and needing to do more with that. Understanding that we started that whole conversation with your emphasis on workforce. But as somebody with a long career at Keene State College, which is a liberal arts school primarily, Is what you're proposing going to mean de-emphasizing history, literature, philosophy, the types of what's the value of that type of education versus the get you in a career and paying job kind of training? Where should we be heading?
I think it's all possible. I've got high school interns working for me that are taking 2 courses in a semester. And the point being, by the time students are reaching their senior year, their 24 credits that they need for graduation have been completed. There are ways that this can fit in by the kind of math and writing programs that we offer, and that we encourage people to explore career opportunities. One, to improve their options for part-time and continuing employment if they seek it, but also to give them the opportunity to explore various careers. Internships, of course, Tom, you were alluding, how can employers help? And certainly on the internship front, but that's where the local initiative really needs to come in. I don't think any state policy is going to guide us to more internships. We could encourage...
Well, I'm not saying this would ever happen, but it could be financially incentivized by the state, for instance.
to help pay for the internships.
But this is New Hampshire, so.
Yeah. You know, what I'm envisioning with that career-ready credential is really just that it says to the employer, this student has met a certain curriculum that enables them to, they've taken the bookkeeping course, or the accounting course, the business introduction course, a math, and a written communications, business communications course, and because the ratio of counselors to students in high schools is somewhere between 250 and 450 to 1. That's not going to be able to customize and guide students into the career paths that they're looking for or interested in exploring. So if communities can come together with their educators and define what those career-ready credentials might be for particular industries, I think we move ourselves much further into the workforce preparedness realm. And that's what we need to do. Let me hit 3 other issues so that I don't exhaust myself on one. Healthcare continues to be very important, whether it's our traditional model of healthcare or community-based services. We face some real healthcare challenges in the state. We frequently speak about it on mental health care, but basically when you talk about the workforce for healthcare, it's lean, and it is interrupting sometimes the delivery of service. On mental health, we have delays in the state mental hospital, we have delays for services in community-based services, and we've, when people need, it's the right care at the right time, and we've got to have a more predictable delivery system, and that will take some more investment, I'm afraid. But we need to be careful as to how we invest those dollars. A third issue is we need a 21st century infrastructure in the state. And yes, roads and bridges traditionally get the most attention from the state, and that is important. But it goes beyond it. It's quality water, it's a quality communication system, and it's renewable fuels. And we've got to have strategies that are going to move this state further into the kind of 21st century infrastructure that's going to be competitive with the other 49 states in our country. And then fourth, we've got to address the property tax burden. It's the kind of, when state government does not deliver, and yet our residents have expectations for comparable services to be available in our state compared to other states, the burden falls on local communities. And we need to find a better balance, because right now our dependence on property taxes is raising the overall cost of housing in the state. When we talk about affordable housing, we can't ignore the fact that property taxes, as high as they are in the state, are contributing to that high cost of housing.
Well, I'm glad you have a solution for the property tax situation in the state, because no one else seems to. What is that solution?
What is it? So, first off, we don't need to raise taxes to begin to address this question. I offered an amendment this last year on property tax relief. It would have helped contribute to the employer retirement contributions that every municipality, town, and school district in the state bears in its entirety for the employer's contribution. We had surplus dollars. It would have been an easy thing to direct $30 or $40 million in that direction, and it would have had an immediate benefit to our local property owners. You know, if you're a business and you have a good year, what do? You share your earnings with your shareholders. In state government, we found ways to distribute it that didn't really benefit our shareholders. So that seems obvious. You know, when we had $120 million surplus this last year, not a single dollar went back to property tax relief. A second thing that we need to look at is the business tax reductions that become effective in 2020 and 2021. These were a central part of legislative strategy in the last 2 years. But you know, the business climate that folks are going to say is so healthy today in New Hampshire isn't shaped at all by the legislation passed over the last 2 years. That was legislation passed 2 years prior to that. This is a $100 million tax cut that I don't think is addressing business's highest need. Business says it needs a workforce that will enable it to continue to grow in New Hampshire. And so I think deferring those tax cuts so that they don't take effect in 20 and 21 will allow us to cover some of the backfill items that we don't have dollars for, that were one-time funded this last 2 years, and enable us to address some of the burdens that exist that drive up the property taxes, and clearly schools are one of those.
Are there revenue streams that the state is not taking advantage of now that you would see wanting to tap? Or
I think we need that conversation, and I think it needs to be had. I think that the state has probably talked itself out of income and sales tax, but there are other kinds of taxes that we could talk about, and there are capital gains taxes that have not been talked about. There's federal relief on capital gains as a result of the excise tax being reduced on the Affordable Care Act, and we have a mechanism for tapping it. So I think there needs to be that dialogue, and I think we've got a bridge mechanism with the surplus that we've been able to see this past year, and that otherwise is going to be remitted to business tax cuts in the next couple of years. That can be a bridge to giving us some immediate relief, so that we can move on and talk further about other ways to provide relief down the road.
You mentioned the workforce issue when it comes to healthcare. Are there other ways you would look to address, to improve healthcare access, lower healthcare costs?
Yes. Well, I've been very active with another table that exists in the region, the Monadnock Healthcare Workforce Group, and carrying legislation on their behalf this last year, so that when we get people credentialed in the state, they actually can go to work as quickly as possible, while all the vetting processes need to take place and permanent credentialing gets put in place. But I passed 2 bills that accelerate the hiring of both nurses and the therapists in the state, respiratory, auditory, speech, occupational, physical therapies. That's working. I passed a bill with the Department of Safety to eliminate the necessary signature by notary public on a background check. It's an unnecessary step. Nobody is checking the notary public's signature to the stamp signature that's recorded with the Secretary of State. It is also arcane. We've moved beyond that. There are electronic filings. Nobody's going to ask for my background. You can't falsify. You want my FBI record on yours? And people don't falsify background checks. So we worked to eliminate that notary public step, and saved 40,000 people from having to go through that step. Now that's not the ocean. The ocean's 160,000 that have to do. 160,000 background checks a year is what the workload that we've built up, because we want to make sure that anybody who walks into our schools as an employee or a volunteer or on a school bus is properly vetted. We want to make sure that in our healthcare systems people are properly vetted. But we've built up a background checking system that is very difficult. So we've got to streamline this and process engineer it. And this was one that we walked through a session. I thought we would wind up with more possible steps that we could take, but this was the low-hanging fruit that we got. I introduced legislation on emergency services that we can accelerate their protocols in response to emergencies. And think carfentanil as you're thinking about this, a substance that hit the streets that when inhaled was toxic. And we did not have a necessary protocol for first responders to be able to deal with those drugs. This legislation gave rulemaking authority to the Board of Emergency Management Services, together with the Commissioner of the Department of Safety, without having to go through the administrative rule writing, with proper vetting with other people in the field. But it will accelerate the delivery of emergency protocols out into the field. So those are some things that I was able to partner with the right parties and get done. There is some legislation on nursing assistants as to how to accelerate their presence in the workforce that I'm working now with the Board of Nursing and the Hospital Association to and the Monadnock Workforce Group to try to accelerate. But I need to continue to be a strong advocate that if we continue to award our state contracts to the largest cities where the largest populations and the largest supply of workforce currently exists, we're going to ignore vast territories of our state from the services that they need to deliver to their population. And it's why it is just crucial that community-based services expand here locally, and that we have reimbursement rates that will allow for that. The opioid substance use disorder funding gives us a path for one-time funding, but in 2 years that will evaporate, and we're going to need to understand how that's been able to improve our healthcare delivery with better reimbursement rates, with more workforce supply, with more portals and points of access, and with the kind of training that people need in order to deal with emergency mental health issues. Okay, I think that covers it.
Well, on the topic of opioids, what do you think the next step lawmakers need to take is?
The next step on the opioid crisis that the state, well, we got to get the money distributed. That's $46 million that the state has access to for the next 2 years. That needs to be distributed by January 1st. And these RFPs are coming out almost daily with 3-week turnarounds.
So that's an HHS thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So would
The State Department of Health and
Yeah.
Human Services.
right? So what would be the next thing that the legislature would take aim at?
Well, we're going to need to look at the mental health reimbursement rates. Residential care is one of those issues that's pretty important in the mental health sphere, meaning we've got New Hampshire Hospital and they need to be able to have a step-down program from New Hampshire Hospital that involves community-based residential care. So residential treatment and care that's distributed around the state it becomes important. The Medicaid bill expansion, granted advantage, that was passed by the legislature this last session has a provision in it that the advisory group examine the adequacy of mental health reimbursement rates. So we've already got the provision. The study will be undertaken by the advisory committee established for granted advantage, and we're going to need to act on that. The workforce supply issues, what kind of incentives we can encourage for hiring, whether that's loan repayment is one option that we need to expand. We do that for physicians that relocate to the state. We can look at other healthcare professionals. We can also look at the healthcare licensure requirements. And in particular, around substance use counselors, requirements that are like 1.5 years of full-time clinical internships. And we need to examine how quickly we can get providers into the insurance reimbursement pool. This has been a complaint of local providers that they get people who are available to work, and it's not just their licensing that needs to accelerate, it's the insurers that need to accept them into the insurance pool so that they can bill for services. And then we need to look at who is eligible for billable time. and make sure that we have the right people able to be reimbursed for the services they can provide to assist people who need care.
Jay, a point of focus during your candidacy 2 years ago was to stem the exodus of young adults from the state. And you've spoken around the issue a little bit in your opening remarks, but can you talk about what you've done during then toward that aim, and what still needs doing?
What I was very much concerned about and remain concerned about is that as high as 60% of our high school graduates are leaving the state to go to college. It means that out of state, even state institutions out of state, have found a way to package their costs, their price to students that's competitive or beats the price that's being offered in the state of New Hampshire. And that's just, I don't think that we have high-cost institutions necessarily. I think they've been, but they're very tuition dependent. And we need to look at how can we help them, those institutions, at least slow the growth in their tuition rates, or provide greater financial assistance. And if we can't do it in the years that students are in college, then we ought to be able to provide the incentive for students to remain in the state once they've graduated from a college here. I also think that the career-ready credential is the kind of thing that gets people into the workforce, that allows them to work and to step their way through education and work and be more self-sustaining. Create alternative pathways for career development. So those are the issues that I have worked on in the past and that I will continue to work on, because I think those are the mechanisms that have worked in other states. And we need to be taking advantage of what they've learned and leapfrogging where we can. I serve on the Education Commission of the States. I'm the Senate's representative to that national organization, which represents all 50 plus our territories. It's a great place to bounce the ideas off of, to see where we're going. I mean, I didn't come up with career-ready credential just because it sounded good. I sponsored legislation to expand who delivers concurrent and dual enrollment opportunities to high school students. I think that's a great mechanism to launch students and make connections back to high school. It didn't pass ultimately, but the delivery, the conversation that it spawned has the university system in Southern New Hampshire University, as well as the community colleges, all moving into the territory of dual and concurrent enrollment. This is what's going to accelerate the high school students into our in-state colleges and universities. I think that's a very strong mechanism to retain the high school graduates that we're losing to out-of-state institutions. And it's also a strong way of moving them into the workforce with some credentials that our workforce is saying, if people just had this, it would save me money and time in hiring them. It also, because of the internship and the familiarity with the industry, it eliminates the turnover rate. Something that I've been disappointed it didn't exactly work out the way that I thought it would. Well, at least you peered into it before you worked full time. These are all things where the state, with the proper vision, can develop the policies that will strengthen our workforce entry. And I think as far as the retention, we need to look at the family leave policies. I think others running for office that have been very vocal about that have hit the right chord. It's not that costly to put in place. And, for those who need to leave the workforce temporarily for family care, whether it's at the beginning of the life cycle or at the end of the life cycle or in between while people are recovering from challenges, that we have policies in the state that support that.
So this state has some of the nation's highest energy costs.
Yes.
What are some remedies to that challenge?
I thought net metering was on the path. Some people say take all the restraints off of net metering and let the private sector or government invest in the kind of renewable fuels that are widely supported by people in New Hampshire. I think that was a big mistake for that vote and for that bill to be vetoed. I spoke to that on the Senate floor. You take a business like Monadnock Paper Mills. It's got 3 700 kilowatt generators on its site. It's one site. That one site is producing 2 megawatts worth of energy. It can only net meter for 1 megawatt because that's its cap. And it's kind of silly. Monadnock Paper Mills has some downtime. It's got 2 megawatts of power it could be putting on the grid and getting reimbursed for it. Here's another example. We've got a project going in Hinsdale, not the big one, but apparently a smaller one that's around 15 to 20 million, 20 megawatts. The infrastructure is already in place, so there are no additional distribution and transmission lines needing to be built by Eversource to take the power. It was abandoned by Vermont Yankee, so the infrastructure is there. The power is being bought by Connecticut. So Connecticut is purchasing the power and getting the credit for having produced it, while New Hampshire is buying the power at the default rate from ISO New England. If our reimbursement rates, which the net metering bill provided for, would encourage producers to not just produce locally, but also to distribute that power to New Hampshire customers. That's the kind of investment that we need. We can't take a 2-year view. We've got a 10-year, the governor's issued a 10-year energy plan. And it all revolves around it. Whatever's cost efficient, most cost effective. And it's never in there is, and what's most sustainable. And we just can't have a myopic criteria as to how we're going to determine our energy future, because all we'll get is more of the same. And that's not really going to sustain us into the future, because it's an infrastructure that's aging. It needs to be replenished with the technologies that are emerging in the 21st century. So I'm a strong advocate for renewable fuels, and I think that we need to be pursuing those more aggressively with policies that encourage it. We run out of our investment money on hydro and solar before we even open up the grant cycle, because there's so much available, and if you need to purchase those credits, if you're a power company, you need to purchase renewable credits, they're out there. You can go purchase them. But it's because we set our limits, our investment pool is so low that it's exhausted before, because of the backlog that there is for the investment pipeline. So governments have invested, schools have invested in 1 megawatt ideas and upwards, and the investment is kind of stalled out because there's not the incentive money. The result of this is that the best dollar that you can invest is the dollar you never have to spend, right? Who am I quoting? Somebody. A lot of people say it. And so investment in energy efficiency has the greatest gain. And why is that? Two reasons. One is transmission and distribution costs are distributed by use, how much power you buy from the ISO grid. And the more that other states in ISO New England invest in energy efficiency, they're lowering their demand curve. If ours just stays constant, we have a higher share of costs that we're going to bear for distribution and transmission. I'm not making that up. That's in fact what's happened in New Hampshire over the last 10 years. So investing in efficiency is another thing. Now, there was another bill that both the governor and the Senate took a walk on this last year. It was House Bill 369. And it was an opportunity to invest in energy efficiency using a little bit of RGGI money that other states are using, and which is Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative money. But we reimburse that, and it makes all the difference in your energy bill on an annual basis of about $20. But you pool those $20 together, and you got millions, and it could go towards energy efficiency efforts that really start to bend the cost curve for New Hampshire.
Now, what would be examples of those efforts? What would the specifics be of where you would put money that would then net you savings?
Yeah, well, let's put it into the schools. The 1928 school that we've got here in Keene, and make it more energy efficient. Wouldn't we win twice on that? They're going to save the money. We're not going to pay the distribution and transmission charges. And it's been done in other states to in exactly that way, to retrofit government buildings. You can also have this for low-income properties. We already have some monies, they're federal monies, that we provide for low-income properties, but we could go further in this and provide the kinds of assistance, technical assistance, that would help low-income property owners understand what the investment is and perhaps be a contributor to those investments so that they have savings as well. Again, ideas that have been tried in other states, that have been introduced in legislation here that we have not been able to move through the legislative pipeline. But energy and renewables, energy efficiency and renewable fuels are two strategies that we have got to give more emphasis in the state.
I'm going to change gears completely here. For a long time now, state lawmakers and governors have pondered the idea of expanding gambling as a resource for revenue. And typically that has been couched in terms of casinos. Should we have casinos? We've had myriad casino bills over the years. And that kind of seemed to die down. All of a sudden, the Supreme Court has said states can now make sports gambling legal. And some states are jumping to do that with an eye toward taking a cut as a revenue source. What are your thoughts on expanding gambling revenues? And would that be tied to a casino? Would it look completely different? Is it something the state should wait on?
I have voted consistently against expanded gambling in New Hampshire. I think it comes with addiction costs that the state would face. I don't think we're on the cutting edge of this any longer. There are casinos that exist in all the other New England states. I don't think the return is as great as may have been touted in years past. So it's not. I will not be out there leading a call for expanded gambling for any purpose in the state. I assume that there'll be legislation again this session, and I think that sports gambling will be one of those topics that will be argued anew given the Supreme Court ruling.
A couple of years ago, I recall a question coming up about legalization of marijuana and recreational use, and I think you indicated you needed some time to give it some thought. I wonder if you have given it thought, and also how that might relate to any thoughts on revenue generation.
Where I've gone on the issue of cannabis is to hear the call of people in Cheshire County around therapeutic marijuana. We have permitted uses of marijuana, prescribed uses, for disease, chronic pain, PTSD, and our delivery system is very thin. 4 distribution centers in the state. The closest one to Cheshire County, for some people living in Cheshire County, can be 2 hours away. So I introduced an amendment this year that would create a satellite dispensary in Cheshire County. I fully expect that that satellite dispensary is going to be in place in the next 9 months, because that was passed and signed into law. We're working on that with the person who would be responsible for it, the Region 3 dispensary franchise that is in Lebanon, our closest distribution center. I think minimally we need to make sure that that is available and accessible and affordable to people locally who need it. That's where my emphasis has been. It's clear that the state's got, the state has an issue, but this is a federal issue. We can't have laws. It's like some of the other social issues that we've faced over the last 20 years, recognizing transgender rights, same-sex couples. We can't do this on a state-by-state basis. It may provide some of the fuel and energy that we need to motivate our federal government to move. But to consider at the federal level that cannabis is an illegal level 1 substance in the same category as heroin, and other states authorizing the growth and the recreational use of the same substance, while it's prohibited in other states, it's going to lead to a very disjointed, not well understood public policy. So I think we need, as a state, to really put some pressure, along with other states, on our federal delegations to make some sense out of this.
Do you have a feel for what sense they ought to make of it?
But they need to make it a legal substance and leave it then to the states to deal with it. But to not, yes, that's the level at which it ought to be dealt with. Then I think we can develop clearer policies around it. I recognize some of the risk that there is in legalization, but it's like any other drug, alcohol included, that needs to have proper education and prohibitions at certain ages, like 21 and under, or under 21, that regulate the uses. So I think we'll learn from the states that have adopted these policies. One thing I don't want to be lured into is that this is a revenue generator for the state of New Hampshire. And if you sense some hesitancy from me 2 years ago, it was for that reason. There are more straightforward ways of dealing with our revenue issues than considering how we're going to tax substances that at one level of government are considered illegal.
Well, then one of the things, so you mentioned a couple of times this region that you represent here in Cheshire County, and the fact that it's more rural than might sometimes be thought. And so I'm wondering, in terms of things that are specific to your district that you think need to get more attention in Concord. Sometimes there's that idea, you mentioned also the larger cities getting contracts for mental health and other services. How do you get people to pay attention to Cheshire County over in Concord? How do you push that?
A lot of different ways, and this is where the job takes an incredible amount of time. But I meet with the commissioners of each of the departments of state government. This last week I met with the commissioner of the Department of Agriculture. We aren't a large agricultural producing part of the country, but 10% of the farms in New Hampshire are in Cheshire County. It's a budding industry. It's also an aging industry, and it's one that we need to continue to talk about and demonstrate that it can be a part of one's lifestyle. It's difficult to make it your primary source of income, but it's one that you can use as part of your lifestyle and a secondary source of income. And many people in Cheshire County do. And for those who can make it as a primary source of income, we need to find ways to continue to support it. Locally grown foods are good, and we should support it. All right, that was just an example. I meet with I'm chairing a mental health and human services alignment and interoperability committee. I have
You should put that on your tie.
I'm not that tall, and it would be a long time. I left 2 words out of that, just to shorten it up. The point is, I've had to cultivate with Health and Human Services the behavioral health leaders of the state to help support the work of that committee. Because ultimately what that committee is trying to do is make sure that your access at point A is connected to your access all the way through the continuum of care that you have. And particularly in the mental health arena, we need to recognize that the points of wraparound care are broad and not specific, and we need to align those services. So that's the purpose of the committee. And so working with that agency, it has given me the opportunity not just to work on the statewide issue, but to say that here in Cheshire County, this is what we need. And I can speak with that voice because every 3 months, our group of 30 comes together and we talk about what's the status of our delivery system and where are the weaknesses. And the state has already done the audit. They've done the audit. They know our weaknesses. It's documented. And so I can be an advocate for those things that our region is most directly interested in. We'll see. Well, I am one who is results driven. And if we can produce results through these relationships, great. I'll give you another one. Commissioner Edelblum. He comes to his job not in the most direct manner that we would appoint an education commissioner for our state, but he has the role, and he wants to do a good job. And I have brought him to the Monadnock region a variety of times. One time it's helped match the Hinsdale School tax bond for their expansion of their elementary school. It was necessary in order for them to have the proper classrooms for kindergarten and first grade that they have that expansion. And getting him to go to that school and experience the level of teaching and care that they're providing to those youngsters, and to not have the proper facilities, the state matched it with the 2/3 match. And that we did the ribbon cutting on that this last Saturday. So that's something that occurred within my first term. Point being, it happened in 2 years, that we took that from the idea that the school had, through the State Board of Education, through the legislature, through the governor, through the funding process, through the construction process, and in 2 years it's up and running. Another one was the Adverse Childhood Experience Grant to Monadnock Regional Schools. It was not funded by the state, and the school board decided, well, we'll continue this. But without the state funding, and Commissioner and I worked through what were the criteria, why were they not funded. And sometimes criteria just do not weight things properly. And if you're a well-developed school system with the resources to have great grant writers, maybe you write great grants. Maybe our grant wasn't the most successful. I stayed on that issue for a year with the commissioner, with his staff. And after that year, they found dollars that had been saved through other contracts that they could award to the Monadnock school system. That led to $1.1 million being allocated over 5 years to make sure that the after-school programs at Cutler and in Troy and at Mount Caesar stayed up and running. So that's the kind of direct contact that you want your state senator to have with those who are charged with the administration of the laws and funds of our state. The Commissioner of Safety and his staff, in order to make the changes that I mentioned earlier. The Commissioner of Environmental Services, to make sure that the water quality issues that we've got in this part of the state don't get lost while we're dealing with cancer clusters in other parts of the state. And that our brownfield issues stay at the front of their agendas. I think I've given you some examples of,
Sure.
of ways. And people that, you know what happens when you invest time in other people? They start to invest time in you. And I'm seeing that. The Board of Nursing has an issue, a little thorny issue, about licensure of nursing assistants. Rather than our Monadnock group going out to them, the director of the Board of Nursing came and met with me yesterday about how I could help her sponsor some legislation that would alleviate a big workload in their office. I agreed to take it on. Another person has asked me, and actually this has come from several different directions in Cheshire County, to deal with the issue of uninsured motorists. It's not one that I've worked on much. My daughter was hit by in her vehicle, as has many people experienced the uninsured motorist issue. We're one of 2 states in the country that doesn't require insurance at the point of vehicle registration. The first place I went to, stopped in, was the New Hampshire Automobile Dealers Association to see, have you guys taken a position on this? I don't want to run into that kind of a roadblock, if there is one. And he said no, we probably have members on both sides of that issue. But that he would explore it, and maybe we'll become partners and begin to talk with the Department of Safety, which does the vehicle registrations, and see what kind of complications they're going to see. But that's the way that you bridge the advocacy, your role as an advocate for the region, with trying to move a large state where you've got legislative colleagues as well as administrative leaders that need to move together. Because when you move out of sync, you might get change, and chances of getting change are low. And if you get it, it may not stick.
Well, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Appreciate your
Let me add that again. I did this last time. I don't know how well this works. I just having a daily newspaper that supports public policy discussions in our region is an invaluable resource. And I want to thank you for all that you do. And if you are endorsing candidates in this upcoming election, I look forward to that you'll give me full consideration. I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jim.
And to the voters in the region, I look forward to meeting you over and talking about issues that are of greatest importance to you. Feel free to contact me at any time on Facebook, on my website, or direct mail me my legislative email address. Thank you. Thank you.